perhaps we can sort of start. Thanks very much for being here. I'm Handel Wright. I'm director of the Center for Culture, Identity, and Education, and also David Lamb, chair of Multicultural Ed. This is one of our, we have a series of presentations from different visitors that we've had over the last while. I want to break with protocol by starting by thanking some of the people who actually do a lot of the work with me on putting on these events. Two of them are here today, my left hand and my right hand. I won't say which is which, but Carolyn Rockart, who is GRA working with me and does very interesting work on multicultural education, and Miriam Mabavi, who's also working with me. Well, we're very privileged today to have with us Jody Berland, who is a professor, associate professor of humanities at York University. She's also a member of the graduate programs in communication and culture, and she's working with several departments and programs at York. Also with the Department of Music, and she's with the graduate program of social and political thought at York University. Jody has published widely on cultural studies, Canadian communication theory, issues around music, radio and video, feminist studies, especially feminist bodies, cultural environmental studies, and issues of social space. She's currently completing, or has completed, just about, a book-length manuscript on culture, technology, and space, which is entitled North of Empire, Culture and Technologies of Space. Jody is also one of 3 North American representatives on the International Board of the Association of Cultural Studies, which is the international association that represents cultural studies all over the world. I'm also on that board, but interestingly, I'm representing Africa. She's also, very importantly, and if you don't know this journal, you should, she's editor of Topia, which is the Canadian Journal of Cultural Studies. It's the premier Canadian Journal of Cultural Studies, published by U of T Press, and edited, Wilfrid Laurier Press, and edited at York. If you don't know that journal, you should know it and you should get it. She has a long list of publications. I won't get into all of them. We want to get at her talk. But I'll mention her edited book, Theory Rules, Art as Theory, Theory as Art. And she's well known internationally as well as nationally in terms of cultural studies work, feminist cultural studies work, communications, especially Canadian communications work. And we're very privileged to have her here because we've had visitors at the center every now and then, but Jody is our first seriously in-house visiting scholar. She's been here for most of October, and so it's an October-November, 2-month-long period of time, and I've really enjoyed talking with her, and she's enjoyed meeting various people, and I'm sure you're still open to meeting more people, so if you want to contact her, you can do so through the CCIE. I know Jody's ready to go. She's working here on issues of, she's one of the few cultural studies people who are not in the field of education, who's seriously interested in issues of pedagogy and the intersection of cultural studies and education, which is why it's so interesting to have her here, apart from her interest in media, new media, etc., etc. So without much more ado, I'll turn it over to Jody Berland.
Thanks. Well, I forgot my brochures for the journal. I might have to run home and get them. So this paper that I'm going to give is part of a larger series that I'm doing right now about animals and communication technologies. And I was thinking this morning that this is, I have done other ones. I'm actually presenting one called Cat and Mouse in Art History on Wednesday at noon. They didn't send me any notice of it, so I can't exactly give you the details, but I do know it's Wednesday at noon. And Caroline has promised that we'll try to get some notice on the CCIE web, and that concerns more, it's about cats.
Is that in the Lacerre building?
Pardon me?
Will that be in the Lacerre building in our history?
That sounds good. But is that up, that's up here?
That's where architecture and art history is.
If it's where art history is, I'm sure that's where it is. And I apologize that I don't know more about it. I just know that it's on noon at Wednesday, and that I'm doing a talk called Cat and Mouse, Iconographies of Nature and Desire. And that one chronologically came before this one. And I was reflecting about it in terms of the writing. It's coming out in Cultural Studies, the journal, in spring 2008. And that one came out of my interest as to why were there so many cats on the internet. And I was, it's a very, very complicated issue, I can assure you, although I have gotten used to 2 years of being attacked for being a cat lady, and I've gotten quite used to it. And, you know, it just won't hurt me anymore. I was thinking that that one might be a little bit more optimistic than this one, but it's a complicated set of issues, I think, and I will try to get through my presentation in 45 minutes so that there is some time for discussion, because despite Handel's generous comment that I am adept in relations between cultural studies and education, I'm really anxious to get some feedback about that relationship in terms of the issues that come out of this talk. So without further ado, also I have a cold, so it'd actually be really great if those of you at the back could move up, because I don't want to have to talk too loud, because I'm just recovering from bronchitis and there's a very loud fan in this room.
I hear you pretty clearly.
But you can hear me?
Yeah.
All right, well, if you stop being able to hear me, you know what to do. Okay. I think this paper has 5 parts. The first part is called Animal as Medium. At the end of an investigative series on global warming published in the New Yorker, Elizabeth Colbert throws up her hands in trying to explain the cause of this looming disaster. It may seem impossible to imagine that a technological society could choose in essence to destroy itself, but that is what we are now in the process of doing. Commenting on her conclusion, Andrew McMurray, professor at Waterloo, writes that we could choose self-destruction is a datum in great need of explanation by anyone who styles himself an eco-critic. Putting aside for now the casual manner in which these authors use terms like we and self-destruction and technological society, the challenge they pose is a serious one. I'm interested in extending this inquiry into the culture of everyday life, and to consider how ordinary practices and assumptions can reinforce or challenge the increasingly dangerous legacy of this technological society. Theorists describe technological society as one in which people think of the world around them as mere indifferent stuff, which they are absolutely free to control any way they want through technology. In the criticism of technological society advanced by Heidegger and subsequent critics of modernity, technology embodies and advances the false promise that man can overcome his limits, and in doing so, reconstitutes what man is thought to be. With this dedication to overcoming limits, technology takes the place of religion as the measure of human realization in the universe. Technology and freedom become rhetorically indistinguishable, and what is left behind by their progress through time or space is redefined as unfreedom. In this configuration, liberalism forms the political corollary of technology. Both proceed from the assumption that man's essence is his freedom, and that liberty is achieved by overcoming or defying necessity, not by living within it. Thus, the human good is what we choose for our good, unquote. What the individual chooses is good for all humans, and what is good for all humans is good for the universe. The we posited here excludes all non-human species and all humans who have failed to win the struggle for freedom. Through this exclusion, technological achievement becomes an and rather than a means, and political judgment disappears. In society where man is seen as the measure of things, writes risk theorist Joost van Loon, risks cannot but become more prominent. Now, given that man is the we, in all of these passages, it is perhaps not surprising that the world is running into difficulties. In reality, no social entity represents a singular subject with homogeneous intents, no matter how it represents itself. And struggles over meaning are an important part of how subjects are formed and power is wielded and contested. This insight from cultural studies is important to understanding this fraught culture we inhabit. At the same time, the challenge of understanding the present must take into account the degree to which cultural technologies both appease and transform the desire for distinction and difference. As technology is engineered and updated to enhance its user's sense of freedom and control, the very nature of social desire and difference is altered. Practices of autonomous personal communication are inseparable from the expansion of a planetary network of telecommunication management and ecological damage over which individuals have little control or seem to have little control. This paradox is the fundamental premise of the theory of risk society, and I'll come back to that. There is no mistaking the power of the corporate world to engender and exploit problems by finding and marketing technological solutions for them. There is no doubt that such pursuit is highly profitable to corporate entities that are systematically evil, and that this process has profound effects on the directions, values, and activities of all spheres of life, to the great detriment of the future of the planet. But none of this fully answers the challenge these writers posed in my first paragraph. The construction of desire, writes Ursula Kelly in Schooling Desire, is always a specific historical practice, manifested culturally and collectively across a range of differences. This character of desire is demonstrated in historical shifts and changes in what is deemed pleasurable and possible in a given context for specific peoples. Unquote. Consider the excitement with which mobile digital technologies are being embraced, not only by consumers and advertisers, but also by journalists, entrepreneurs, consultants, academics, artists, and other commentators. Announcing Apple's iPhone as recipient of the Time Magazine 2007 Invention of the Year Award early this month, Time's Lev Grossman explains it this way. One of the big trends of 2007 was the idea that computing doesn't belong just in cyberspace. It needs to happen here, in the real world, where actual stuff happens. This is just the beginning. The new trend is that cyberspace isn't real after all. Something more compelling is now emerging, something better, something you can carry with you, a more general telematic trend toward wearable, handheld, and pocket communications and entertainment media, which, as the online journal Fiber Culture puts it, in which individuals are being micro-targeted. Unquote. But communication may not be real either. If technology distracts its users, the convergence of mobile digital technologies promises to restore them to a universe in which they once again occupy the center. This narrative is, among other things, a form of liberal pedagogy which emphasizes individual needs and desires and promises that they can be pursued unproblematically into the world of commodity exchange. But this world is not unproblematic. Look more closely at the language through which this new device is celebrated. It is no accident that in Grossman's hymn to the iPhone, it is the device that communicates and converges, not the person. In this narrative, total technical interconnection produces individual autonomy and freedom. Notwithstanding the old-fashioned idea that communication involves reciprocal understanding, this discourse is all about one speaker and his solitary actions. At heart, writes George Meyerson in his study of mobile phones from the perspective of Heidegger and Habermas, the mobile concept is about being in control as a separate and distinct individual. In the age of full mobilization, communication refers primarily to a flow across a system. Voices and such like would be simply one small aspect of this traffic. The result would be the takeover of the term communication by its opposite, the term system. You can see the Habermasian legacy there, if any of you have read Habermas's communication theory, as the idea of a system world and the life world as two opposed kind of social forms. For Habermas, it is not a matter of indifference to a society whether and to what extent forms of social integration dependent on consensus are repressed and replaced by anonymous forms of system integrative association. You can just be very glad that I don't write like that. Anonymous forms of system integrative association. The individual speaks. Countless individuals express or seek their desires without ever thinking about being caught up in a system. The mobile concept of communication promises to fuse system and society to the extent that questions about real communication, understanding, and consensus seem obsolete. Doesn't it already feel a little bit quaint, Meyerson asks, even sentimental, to think about real communication? In his study of risk society, von Jung uses the word fable to describe a narrative which offers an ordered representation of the world by forgetting it. The fable trumps other kinds of knowledge because it disconnects representation, signification, and value. Such disconnection seems ironic in a terrain so obsessed with convergence. Its truth value is the effect of what Eve Stoller describes in a very eloquent essay on North American Empire, which remarkably but characteristically contains no reference to Canada, as, quote, a willful compartmentalization of its entangled parts, unquote. The problem of such compartmentalization can be seen everywhere. Notwithstanding the technical capacity to circulate images of families united by cell phones or prisoners tortured in Abu Ghraib, for instance, or rather, because of this technical capacity, it is not possible to assume any direct correlation between what a picture shows and what a picture does. The ambivalence about whether a communication communicates has its own effects in the ordering of space and meaning. When global warming is the test and limit of representation, as it is for me today, what matters is the emotional power of the fable of compulsory communication as a liberating event. As an invention, something like rods from God is far more overtly military and destructive of life than something like the iPhone. But it would be neither thinkable nor economically feasible without a growing market for digital and satellite communication technologies. Rods from God is an outer space weapon being developed by the Pentagon that relies on digital information processing and search capabilities to guide lethally projected tungsten rods to targets on or beneath the Earth's surface. Guided by satellite and driven by its own kinetic energy, the rods is heralded as an exciting but fearsomely expensive innovation in the corporate military research and development infrastructure. Rods from God is the brainchild of the so-called revolution in military affairs, which involves the application of digital and network theory to war. This project seeks to establish what Brian Murphy describes as a continuous four-dimensional physical and cyberspace grid through which all warfighting relationships are linked. This revolution replaces earthbound technologies of the military arsenal by shifting communication from a tactical to a strategic role. The rods from God deliver a unique, horrific fascination, which I've talked about elsewhere, but they are the logical end of a new military communicative partnership, which is redefining war and communication by focusing on the relationship between them. This revolution is known acronistically as C4ISR. Command, control, computers, communications, intelligence gathering, surveillance, and reconnaissance. Command, control, computers, communications, intelligence gathering, surveillance, reconnaissance. The Pentagon's strategic transformation into C4IS4, how can that be IS4? C4, never mind, that's what it's called. C4ISR, occurred between 1992 and 2004. According to Murphy, 25% of its contractors specialize in information technology and have not held previous military contracts. These are some of those companies. Canadians are certainly not untouched by this trend. TELUS recently reduced its staff by a cruel 25% and won a 2006 contract to supply the Department of Defense with global telecommunication services. Today, TELUS generates 44% of its revenues from wireless communications. The merger between military and telecommunications missions coincides with a new trend, or what I'm going to call media event, in visual culture, in which animals have been conscripted to help promote consumer technologies across Canada and other countries. Putting aside for now the difficulties of explaining this coincidence, let us look at the visible face of this telematic grid. The phrase reminds me of Derrida's provocative question, does the animal have a face? And its assemblage of small animals and small machines in the fabulizing universe of total communication. From thousands of websites featuring digital kittens, and as I will explain on Wednesday, cats are the most prolific content of the website, I believe, after pornography. From thousands of websites featuring digital kittens, just don't get me started, I'll get lost forever, to hundreds of billboards showing monkeys with cell phones, there is no escaping this association. The advertising of the double lots has isolated the vocabulary of connection circulating more broadly across the digital media sphere and put it to work. This campaign is part of the process through which up-to-date multitasking cell phones are being advanced as solutions to problems that are defined in part by the logic of the campaign. Media theorists would define this campaign as a remediation of its technical antecedents. Did you buy a cell phone, an iPod, or maybe an MP3 player, a digital camera, and a laptop computer? Oh dear. Understandably, you want them all to hand, for your life is very, very busy. But you want to simplify. You want to pare down. You want to have them all together in one small, attractive container, which can finally free you to live your life. Letting loose the monkeys, dogs, lizards, cats, and butterflies across the advertising spaces of the cities in several countries is part of a social process through which communication technologies converge in the fold of your hand. Of course, all ad campaigns set out to produce emotionally driven economic behavior. They are successful when their authors creatively conscript and work together with the moods and sentiments of popular affect, which seem to surpass and even resist the field of commerce. Consumer technologies like advertising succeed because they find a way to intervene in the familiar routine practices and feelings of everyday life, promising in this case that new technologies can enhance your social life without damaging what you value in it. You can be spatially or temporally disconnected from people and places and still remain connected to what matters. You can take on the world and never be alone. In any case, new media make the concept of the individual obsolete. As Mark Poster, post-structuralist media theorist par excellence, puts it, machines have an intelligent-like function that does not allow the individual to have the same sense of control over text and over other objects. The individual becomes aware of participating in something greater than himself or herself, in something where the individual does not have a fixed vantage point, that is one of cognitive strength. Of course, part of my question is whether or not, or let's say where and under what conditions this is actually the case. This is a mixed blessing, since taking possession of these technologies means being possessed by them, just as the post-structuralists have said of images and of language itself. It means carrying surveillance technologies and the techniques and rigors of constant communication into every inhabited space of your busy life. The more control or freedom you seek through smart machines, the more you are imbricated with a network that follows you everywhere. Only the future can determine whether this is a good or a bad thing. And the future is what the new technological regime is all about. Like the language of risk management, these post-humanist appraisals assert that the real potential of new media will become evident only in future events, over which such technologies may or may not offer greater control to the individual subject, who is in any case being made obsolete, look at this poor little fellow, by the digital inversion of the modern subject. The more ambiguous your identity becomes in this hyper-mediated landscape, or what Virilio calls the information bomb, the more open you must surely be to other forms of experience. If connection completes you, why not connect to animals? Never has a family pet been the recipient of so much lavish attention. As an animal lover, Greenpeace supporter, and sometimes vegetarian who worships cats, I embrace this openness to other species and hope that this sense of animal connectivity is part of the future arising from these post-human sensibilities. After all, it's the dogs she's getting to cuddle. But the message that more efficient communication solves the problems created by the growing power of technological society is a fabulation with disturbing implications. How appropriate that an animal should appear to illustrate a fable. The presence of animals in the production of human culture is arguably as old as human culture and just as variable. Animals have served as symbols, totems, currencies of exchange, messengers, slaves, sacrifices, toys, food, surfaces for writing, protective wrapping for skin and limbs, parts of instruments, parts of armies, and vehicles of connection at the local park. Animals are the first and most permanent mediators of humans in relation to one another and in relation to power. Throughout history, animals have been offered to political rulers in exchange for social well-being, to gods in exchange for rain or restoration of the social order, or to hungry consumers in search of real man food. In such interactions, animals are put to work simultaneously as object, medium, and message. When Canadian agricultural activist Farmer Brown claims that agribusiness doesn't farm animals, but rather farmers, a similar yet unsettlingly new sense of the animal as medium emerges. In this context, possessing animals is less a source of empowerment than a form of enforced containment through which the farmer is appropriated by corporate agribusiness for the recapitalization of nature. Such farmers are often subject to appalling working conditions that evoke the popular expression being treated like animals while receiving less attention and compassion for their suffering than we have come to expect in response to severe maltreatment of the lesser species. A slight tangent, I think. If we understand biopower as a transformative regime that alters humans, animals, and technologies through their increasing interaction in non-linear, non-equitable, non-equilibrium, nowhere is this more clear than in the case of animals, which are condemned to work in both directions, in relation to humans and in relation to technology, and increasingly as an articulation of the three. Okay, part two, the virtual animal. Advertising is a good example of the principle that nothing is more virtual than the obvious. Animals, mobile phones, of course. The animals featured in these ads are consumable, mobile, cuddly, and useful. But the question the cultural researcher must always ask is, why now? In the 1950s, billboards were full of kitchen appliances, which, as Susan Buck-Morss has shown, were instrumental in spreading the image of the American dream across the dreamscape of the Soviet Empire. In the 1990s, images of angels crowded the surfaces of popular visual culture and kitsch commodities, arguably as a consequence of the militarization of space. They function as souvenirs or prisoners of war from a distant space once known as heaven, but later conquered by Star Wars and optical probes. Now it is small animals covering the billboards, calendars, and coffee mugs. What are they telling us? In his reflection on the aesthetics of livingness, Jonathan Burt suggests that there are two possible conditions of response to the animal in art: something to say and nothing to say. To follow this trail into advertising is to undertake an exercise in semiotic analysis of a technoculture whose meaning production is, in the words of Andrew Wernick, evolving towards a decorative eclecticism whose signifying gestures refer us only to the universe of symbols from which they are drawn. Indeed, there is no more accessible a universe of symbols than the graphic representation of animals. They are part of everyone's childhood. You can trace the morphology of this universe through children's literature and toys, through National Geographic and exotic tourist motifs, to Shrek and Nemo, to contemporary advertising. The memories triggered by these associations are anything but shocking. These animals refer to what they once meant, rather than to something that actually exists. They encourage a childlike narcissism as they transform nature into technoculture. By having nothing to say, these digital animals have something to say. The images suggest affect, but they don't deliver on it. And we have to do the emotional work ourselves. Because they gesture at feeling without expressing it, they offer a homeopathic intervention into the state of embodiment we know as attachment. The images offer this feeling to viewers as the potentiality of technological mediation. The pictures of animals promise a sense of communication between communication and security, which is seemingly analogous to the natural connection between animals and man, and which is waiting to be fulfilled the way a love-struck teenager waits for a phone call. This promise has been extremely effective in the campaign to mobilize consumers in the development of the global telecommunications network. These animals are being exploited in more ways than one. The campaign to expand the market for rapidly obsolescing consumer electronics is part of a larger strategy to engender economic support for the hyperbolic development of communication military hardware on which the American economy, in particular, so strongly depends. In countries in Africa and Asia, the peoples, landscapes, and non-human species who are not included in the we that defined our initial quandary bear the destructive weight of a rapidly growing volume of toxic trash which completes the cycle of production and consumption of these rapidly obsolete telecommunication technologies. So drastic are the conditions that new paramilitary security forces are being formed to control the workers whose job it is to dispose of the toxic trash that we are exporting to their countries. Of course, none of this is visible in any explicit sense in the portrayal of animals and machines with which we are presently concerned. The social consolidation of a technology like the cell phone or the car shapes the habits and expectations of people who use them. As we learn to depend upon them, we become human extensions of their techno-social forms. Taking this insight one step farther, we need to understand our interactions with these technologies as part of the escalating management of risk society. The paradox of risk society is that by using technologies to manage danger, the entrepreneurs of risk create further dangers, which are less and less subject to conventional management. The technologies that solve problems of security and safety in one place, or for one group of people, are going to create destruction and dissent in and for another. Such hazards are permissible as long as they are profitable and distant. The theory of risk society is useful for understanding the dangers of consumer technologies while empathizing with the needs and feelings of young people who consider their personal digital communication media to be lifeboats in the face of unmanageable uncertainty and danger. The animals remind them of their freedom and innocence, which they hastily abandon on their own behalf. It is not just animals who fail to benefit in the balance of things. Now, where are we for time? Now I'm going to skip over some things because I know I'm going to run out of time, and this is my whole theory of triangulation. So we have here cats. I'm setting this up to talk about a history of triangulation where you have cats, animals, humans, and codes of representation and communication forming a triangulation in which no one part can be understood without the other. Each meaning is determined by its relationship to other parts. And then in the 20th century, phones become animals, animals become media of communication, which cajole young people to connect better, more often, everywhere they go. Yes, that goes with the other cats. These are pictures I'm not allowed to show because of privacy laws, although my point is in part that even though I'm not allowed to show these pictures because of privacy laws, no one is stopping anyone from following them on their telephones. All right. Today, the study of human-animal or human-technology relations draws on French sociologist Bruno Latour's actor network theory, in which social practice is the outcome of interactions among multiple agents, human, technical, animal, and others. Water can be an agent, or a microscope, or radiation, or wolves. This is a good starting place for understanding the triangulation of animal cell phones and human consumers. But animals are not authors of this advertising campaign, despite their clever representation as neoliberal subjects. And furthermore, as I've already suggested, what is invisible is as important to its meanings as what is seen. That is why we need to understand this campaign as part of the management of risk. The production of consumers for new consumer electronics don't just serve economic ends. It also serves to manage and contain the growing risks and fears of technological growth while magnifying them at the same time. Understanding this campaign as part of the process of risk formation allows us to emphasize what Latour's work does not, the significance of what is concealed. The simulated embodiment of the animal communicates the idea that information can be liberated from time, space, and materiality in general. The more strongly you feel the effects of compulsory connectivity, to follow Meyerson's logic, the less likely you are, it is presumed, to acknowledge its effects on distant bodies and natural spaces. Mobile digital communication devices can be understood then as both manager and cause of contemporary insecurity and risk. Now I have a long discussion about the theory of the immediate event, which I'm also going to skip, but I cannot resist showing you the images and the whole problematic of the marketing of cell phones to children. So I'm going to skip now to part 3, vocabularies of connection. No one can fail to notice the increasing visibility of animals in contemporary image culture. It is both ironic and poignant that such images are so closely aligned with the signs and practices of technoculture. As Lisa Nakamura has observed, in this post-internet culture of simulation in which we live, it is increasingly necessary for stable, iconic images of nature and the other to be evoked in the world of technology advertising. By her account, such images beckon the viewer toward travel to beautiful and exotic places. In phone and iPod ads, however, the scale of the imaginary horizon is considerably reduced. It is the potential mobility of the phone that is celebrated, and the animals possess no relationship to any site but the interface. Note that this is an always already triangulated image in which an animal embraces a cell phone, or vice versa, and looks at us. Their readiness to look back at us functions both as a validation of and promise of compensation for the cold universe of machinic distance. Writing about his cat, Jacques Derrida focuses on the experience of being seen by it. What role, he asks, does the other play in who I am? Can I know the cat? What does the cat see when he looks at me? A common sense reading of the staged encounter in the ads points us toward affect rather than meaning, or as its outcome, or rather affect as the source of meaning. As feminist cultural theorists like Lauren Berlant, Jennifer Harding, and Deirdre Primham emphasize, emotion is a central category of experience, which is increasingly implicated in power relations and constantly negotiated in the relationship between public and private spheres. Of course, advertising is all about manipulating emotions. It produces lack together with compensation and promises something magical in the spaces between them. This promotional logic, like the technology it's promoting, is spreading into all domains of personal and social experience, including nature. Let's look more closely at the images. These animals look at us, well, not this one, and say, you are not alone. Whether you are living or dead, you can reach out and touch someone. Just as companion animals confirm our humanity, you will find companions in the midst of this dead space and the death of space. These species are all mobile in relation to the human body. That is, we can imagine picking up and carrying any one of them like a telephone, except perhaps for the butterfly. As the exception that proves the rule, Google connects moose internet services to moose hunting licenses, constellating an animal image that advertises its own murder, the way that simulated cows sometimes appear in food ads inviting us to eat manly beef. How easily companionship flips into violence when the animal begins to grow. But this is the deeper truth of all the images. Let us consider their cumulative rhetorical achievements. First, their contribution to the process of reification through which personal consumer technologies appear to be simple and straightforward to use, not requiring any special knowledge or skill. In this respect, these child-sized animals are a direct descendant of the babies used to advertise player pianos a century ago. And I'm quoting from my own study of player pianos here. The idea that mechanization of instruments made music accessible to the unskilled efforts of toddlers and children became a central motif in their promotion and quickly became the chosen strategy for advertising automatic pianos. Gulbranson used the image of a baby accompanied by the slogan, "Easy to play. All the family will quickly become expert without long practice. All the joy without hard work." Or as Kodak put it in an important post-war marketing campaign, "Just push a button." we do the rest. In reiterating this theme, these animal images seem to reduce embodiment to its most basic level. An animal doesn't have a body, the thinking goes, it is a body. In the romantic vocabulary of this campaign, the animal body stands in for a part of us that is not incorporated by the machine, offering a glimpse of transcendence or overcoming, which will be realized by being incorporated into the network. This animal is a body in movement, unconstrained by stationary media, like conventional telephones or landlines or computers, desktops, with their topographic baggage. The implied freedom of the animal, unencumbered by thought, is double inscribed by the rhetoric of choice. You can choose the monkey or the dog, this phone or the other. It naturalizes the process of choice by creating a parallel between your dog and someone else's, your phone and the monkey's bananas, without tying the process of identification too closely to spatio-temporal context like here or there, because there it can be anywhere. This Mobius-shaped homology between animal and belonging can be seen as a form of postmodern totemism. Totemism was an important subject for early modern anthropologists excited by the visible logics of primitive societies under their gaze, which was brilliantly summarized in Levi-Strauss's book, Totemism. So the argument I want to make here is that this isn't so much totemism, but almost its reverse, which is making the suggestion that we can choose our own tribes, we can make them up, we can choose them. This is actually a constellation of two different images. This is one list of ringtone samples. But if you go online, you'll find that you can get ringtones representing many different kinds of animals. So if you want your phone to sound like an animal, you have a very large range of animals to pick from. The homologies between animals and human identities seem very arbitrary, even more so than parallel sets of differences between Levi's and Buffalo jeans, or Fords and Hondas. The difference that makes a difference is how quickly these associations change across space and time. Modern subjects need to be flexible, adaptive, mobile, disloyal. There is a detachment from meaning tied up with attachment to the object, a loss, in other words, that is parallel to the detachment of animals from their habitat. This loss seems potentially contradicted by the presence of the friendly animal, which can roam across tropical zones without requiring us to think about them. The world's a jungle out there. Okay, another task performed by these images concerns young people's acute awareness of the currency of their personal technologies. In their culture, the display of communication technologies is part of the presentation of self to others. And cultural competences in the use of these technologies are highly coded, especially in terms of gender. It is logical in this context that mobile digital convergence acquires precedence over prior modes of social interaction. Multi-featured cell phones enhance their owner's social capital. They privilege mobility, currency, and connection. They valorize speed and convenience, all important aspects of contemporary technoculture. These properties are also practices. Consider a local restaurant or a college cafe. Two friends are having lunch. They place their phones on the table. The phones are vital elements of self-presentation, but they also redefine the context of the social event. The phones signal that both participants are ready to leave their face-to-face conversation to engage in a mediated conversation with someone else without leaving the table. As media researchers Caron and Caronia show, the social context is redefined by techno-objects which introduce a new pattern of meaning, the absent presence of human subjects. The person who is abandoned by her friend's phone call is on standby and must learn to interact with ghosts. The phone introduces new cultural models for the context and the participant's behavior. Caron and Caronia suggest that youth function as adept translators of technologies into the terms of their specific cultures. So, the person who has abandoned her friend is not rude, she is cool. Where the friends are having lunch is not a place, it's a launching site for personal encounters, where social differences are justified and normalized by the technology. The minimum obligation, they say, is to be always, at all times, and everywhere, at least available for communication. Two things are lost in this new regime of compulsory communication: freedom and silence. Third, digital communication devices are like biotechnologies in that they are concerned in more or less sophisticated ways with diversifying those limited things of which bodies seem capable. If a body cannot make the sound of 100 instruments sounding simultaneously, a computer can. If a body cannot be in 3 places at once, or even feel connected to others in one place, a cell phone can help. Callers seem increasingly oblivious to the space they're in, as anyone knows who has walked, driven, or sat next to them, but they talk of little else. I'm coming out of class, I'm just leaving home, the bus is at Yonge Street, we've landed and I'll see you in a bit. If any of you have flown lately, it's amazing. As soon as the plane lands, everybody whips out their phones and they say, we've landed, I'll see you in a bit. It's a totally, totally redundant, extraneous, unnecessary phone call, which everybody makes. Very interesting. By putting the phone to use, the speaker establishes her location in the grid and reconfirms her agency. Her participation in the human-machine interface appears to solve problems of embodied connection and to challenge conventional practices of identity formation. The human-animal mimesis can be seen as a form of symbolic and practical armor against the leaking of meaning from the body in a culture that is obsessed with the body but has no time for embodiment. Even the animals are reassuringly digital. Fourth, then, these images are not just communications dedicated to interaction, as totems are said to be. They are blatant invitations to communicate. Ironically, these animal images are inviting us to communicate 24/7 in the same cultural moment that philosophers are debating species incommensurability and the perceived impossibility of communicating with animals. They like to quote Wittgenstein, if a lion could speak, we would not understand him. Part 4. Okay, I'm getting there. Can I keep going?
Yeah.
Is everybody okay? If you want to leave, this is a good moment. Part 4, talking to animals. To situate the animal within a triangulated image event is to acknowledge that the communication doesn't just move in one direction. Each part of this triangulation is ready to send and receive messages. In his 1995 study of angelology, Michel Serres observes that media establish human-machine intercommunications, but do not enable us to talk to animals. In contemplating the question of communication with animals, John Durham Peters also makes the connection with angels. That we can never communicate with the angels is a tragic fact, but also a blessed one. A sounder vision is of the felicitous impossibility of contact. My emphasis on the debt that the dream of communication owes to ghosts and strange eros is intended as a corrective to a truism that is very much alive, that the expansion of means leads to the expansion of minds. In his review of Peter's book, Donald Thiel adds that, quote, the problem of communications is not that we think of animals, aliens, and machines as exotic, but that we fail to recognize that it is we who are exotic. Projecting exoticism into the animal reinforces the assumption that humans understand, while animals lack sentience and reason. It is because Western civilization has relied on this distinction that cruelty to animals has been condoned throughout its history. Philosophers and animal rights activists dispute this allegation. Of course, these images play with the assumption that animals lack thought or perception by associating them with communication. The irony hints that qualities like sentience and reason are extraneous to the task of re-enchanting the world of media. The joke is that they want to communicate with us. The joke is on us because we are more like animals than we think. We are willing to abandon morals and reason if we can buy a cute new phone like this one. We are willing to sacrifice the land, the safety of others, and the future of the species for this pleasure. If humans are defined by concepts in moral relations, our objects undergo constant slippage. One thing constantly substituted for another as though nothing is unique or sacred or indispensable. The way this process seems to be carrying us slowly and inexorably toward the extinction of life might be considered one of the ways we are exotic. So I'm now going to sum up with, I've done my rhetorical analysis. I'm now going to sum up 5 points of actualization in the connection between cell phones and animals. First, animals on cell phones. There are 5. Animals on cell phones on animals, cell phones for animals, humans with cell phones, and what the cell phones fail to rescue, just so you know what's coming. 1, animals on cell phones. If you carry their pictures with you, your ability to remain viscerally connected no matter where you roam is symbolically confirmed. At the end of a course called Nature and Narrative, I queried 5 fourth-year undergraduate women over a beer. All of them had cell phones. All of them had pet phones on their cell phones, including one student who doesn't own a pet. Viewed together, these snapshots draw our attention toward the ordinarily unrevealed networks of human-animal technological interfaces in which compliance is translated into love. Freedom so quickly turns into its opposite, where love and technology are concerned. 2, cell phones on animals. Cell phones are physically harmful to animals through each stage of their cycle of production. They contain an ore called coltan, mined in Africa. While many animals are in wildlife preserves or protected parks, illegal miners continue to invade the area because demand for the ore is so high. Cell phones and their accessories also contain arsenic, cobalt, copper, lead, and zinc. So animals are put in jeopardy not only while we mine the products to produce the phones, but they are put in jeopardy when we throw them away. A study conducted by 3 departments of Punjab University in India, released in March 2007, reveals that cell phones are the dominating source of electromagnetic radiations in the city, in the environment of the city, and can lead to disease in plants and animals. Ever wondered where the butterflies, some insects, and birds like sparrows have vanished? The initial newspaper write-up of this study begins. Well, your constantly ringing cell phones could be responsible for this. Concerned about such concerns impinging on their profits, Google ensures the availability of advice on how to avoid symptoms like hot ear, dizziness, nausea, illness, and tumor when using your phone. This doesn't solve the problem of what happens when you recycle your phone or your computer, but surely Google has these issues in mind, as they are currently developing new software for mobile phones. American researchers have recently announced a plan, this is my favorite, I have lots of documentation if anyone's interested, have recently announced a plan to equip cell phones with monitoring devices that will alert users to toxic materials in their environment. They don't explain how to manage the nearly 500,000 cell phones discarded each day across their country, but a certain uneasiness about the issue haunts the landscape. All right, thirdly, cell phones for animals. There is an upside. You can donate your cell phones to zoos, humane societies, and animal rights organizations, which will use the proceeds to help animals, including endangered species. If you aren't ready to lose your phone, you can buy a purple paw to hang on it, and Purple Paw will donate funds to the animal rescue site. Zoos may be losing their credibility as contributors to animal welfare, but they are working hard to regain legitimacy by taking in the e-waste generated by young adults with fond memories of days at the zoo. Thirdly, animals with cell phones. Thanks to Photoshop, animals are infinitely adaptable to machinic environments. They talk, they invest, they rap, they gamble. We don't have to worry about other environments because we don't see them. Being transparently artificial, the images occupy a completely abstract digital space and suggest that we can harmlessly do the same. Fifth, humans with cell phones. But don't worry, if information overload and planetary depletion are stressing you out, medical research confirms that companion animals are good for your health. Owning a pet shows direct benefits for blood pressure and other stress-related physical indicators. If you are worried about your pet, revisit 4. You can equip her with a digital communication device or even a cell phone. All of these are available. You can always know where they are, just as someone always knows where you are. And 6, what the cell phone fails to rescue. During Hurricane Katrina, some people were rescued because they had access to cell phones, but many did not. Most animals did not survive. They were expendable, just like the black people of New Orleans, as Carolyn Ellis writes in an eloquent account of reliving Katrina at the site of a half-dead cat. In the wake of global climate change, poor people, pets, and other species are losing their habitats. Some populations, like cats, are actually exploding. Others are being decimated by the destruction of their habitats by the e-waste of the digital communication devices upon which we knowledge workers so strongly rely. Now, I do have a conclusion, but I'm going to just skip it and stop here and see if you have any questions about any of this, including the conclusion.
Paper is good. really refreshing to hear someone tie together so many angles on technology. I'm afraid many of us, while critical of all this stuff, have also been sucked in tremendously. I have heard the thing of cell phones radiating people and causing cancer, higher cancer rates to people, brain cancers from living, people who live with their cell phones. And people who I know who are neurologists are scared to death of cell phones. What we rarely get to hear is a paper that puts it all together and then re-theorizes the animal rights question in relation to the human rights questions. And I'm wondering, when you think about this, the relationship between the two,